altruistic motivation. All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience, may they experience happiness, be separated from suffering. As swiftly I'll establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddha. All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience, may they experience happiness, be separated from suffering. As swiftly I will establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddha. Dang la, dang war, jpe dra, no par, jpe ke. Darpa dang tam che kenpe, bardu chopar, jpa tam che kiso je. Manam ka dang yampe semchen tam che dewa dang den. Dung ya dang dra nirdu lana me pa yang. Dang par zokpe chang chu rimpo che do par ja. The action bodhicitta prayer. Thus, until I achieve enlightenment, I perform virtuous deeds, body, speech, and mind. Until death, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From now until this time tomorrow, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. De chedu sang mage ki bardu lugang isum gewala ko. Ma she bardu lugang isum gewala ko. Tu de ring ne sung te ni ma sang da sang ki bardu lugang isum gewala ko. A long refuge prayer. We take refuge in the kind root lama, the lineage lamas. We take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of the yadams. We take refuge in all the exalted Buddhas. We take refuge in the perfect Dharma. We take refuge in the excellent order of the Sangha. We take refuge in all the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharmakartas, possessors of the eye of wisdom. We take refuge in the kind root lama and the lineage lamas. We take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of the yadams. We take refuge in all the exalted Buddhas. We take refuge in the perfect Dharma. We take refuge in the excellent order of the Sanghas. We take refuge in all the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharmakartas, possessors of the eye of wisdom. Rinchen Zawadang Gurpar Chepe Padan Lama Dampa Namla Kayop Sochio Yedam Kilkorgi Lakshog Namla Kayop Sochio Sangje Chomden de Namla Kayop Sochio Dampe Cho Namla Kayop Sochio Pakpe Jendung Namla Kayop Sochio Pawo Kandro Choyok Sume So Yeshiki Chendang Denpa Namla Kayop Sochio. Taking the Bodhisattva vow. Until I attain the heart of enlightenment, I take refuge in all the Buddhas. I take refuge in the Dharma and likewise in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. As the previous Buddhas embraced the enlightened mind and progressed on the Bodhisattva's path, I too, for the benefit of all sentient beings, give birth to bodhicitta and apply myself to accomplish the stages of. Until I attain the heart of enlightenment, I take refuge in all the Buddhas. I take refuge in the Dharma and likewise in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. As the previous Buddhas embraced the enlightened mind and progressed on the Bodhisattva's path, I too, for the benefit of all sentient beings, give birth to bodhicitta and apply myself to accomplish the stages of the path. Chang Chu Mnying Por Chiki Bor Sangje Namla Kayop Sochi Chodang Chang Chu Sempe Yi Shokla Yang De Shin Kayop Sochi Jetar Gong Yi De Sheki Chang Chu Thung Yi Kepata Chang Chu Sempe La Pala De Dang Rim Shin Nefata De Shin Jola Pendong Du Chang Chu Sem Ni Ki Yis Tuzin Du Ni La Pala Rampar Shindu La Pargi. A short refuge prayer in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent. I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent. I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient. Sangje Chodang So Ki Chong Nam La Changchu Bardu Dang Gi Kayop Sochi Dang Gi Jin So Ji Pe So Nam Ki Drola Pensho Samge Drupar Shu. Four measurables. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from suffering. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering, the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. Manam kadang yampe sem chen tamche dewadang dewe gurdang den par gurshi dunya dang dunya giudang drawar gurshi dunya mepe dewadang idrawar gurshi Nyering chagdang nyedang draway tang yong la nepar gurshi.
Will you do the Saragamati requested sutra on page 12, just in English, please?
Yes. Likewise be extinguished. Extinguish all enemies to my purpose. Whatever evil forces are in me, be defeated. Do this so that when I am victorious, all pure radiance melts into me, completely purified. Take all this knowledge, food and drink, peacefully. Enjoy it. Be satisfied so that all obstacles may be destroyed. Be liberated from all obstacles, all general obstacles. Maras are defeated by this gesture of the Buddha. By reciting this mantra, may all the Maras be purified. As a result, may all the Maras be defeated.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Okay, so we've been talking about the four thoughts that turn the mind to the Dharma, the preliminary foundation awakenings. So does anyone have any questions about anything that we talked about last time or anything else related? Okay, very good. And what we'll do is we'll go through and we'll read pages, we'll recite pages together, 1 and 2 and 3, and then we'll begin on page 4. That's where we left off. So that's where we'll begin tonight on page 4, our discussion. So page 1, a precious human life. The freedoms and advantages so extremely difficult to obtain accomplish the purpose of human life. If one does not achieve benefit from this now, how could this opportunity come again? Oh, this kind of leisure and endowment is supremely difficult to obtain. When one obtains a body which is easily lost, do not waste it meaninglessly, but rather use it to attain ultimate liberation, joyous result. The italics, it says, it has been said, to be born a precious human being is more difficult than a blind turtle at the bottom of the vast ocean, greater than all the oceans combined on the earth, rising up from the depths of the water once every 100 years in order to poke its head through a single small wooden yoke floating on the ocean's surface. It also says, those who have great fortune to make a connection with the teachings are rare, and those who really take them to heart and embody them in their actions even rarer, as rare in fact as the stars in broad daylight. So now please take a moment and contemplate the meaning of this. You may read this again quietly to yourself or meditate. Just contemplate the meaning of a precious human life. Okay. Impermanence, pages 2 and 3. Ka, no matter what has been done, nothing benefits at the time of death. Worldly activities, yes, they are lies. Ka, the 8 worldly dharmas are like a painted rainbow. Think you can put your trust in them? In the certainty of death and knowing that nothing remains long, quickly accomplish liberation. Impermanence makes departure certain, like the shadow of the setting sun. Abandoning laziness and indifference, blaze like fire in fierce diligence. This life is impermanent, like clouds in the autumn sky. Birth and death migrators are the same, like actors in a play or a dance. The life of beings is like lightning in the sky, like water falling from a steep mountain cliff It departs quickly, quickly. The nature of all phenomena is impermanence. Death is a certainty to all who are born. Death can descend any time like a drop of morning dew on a blade of grass. Quick, it is time to make effort for the essence of the Dharma. The eight worldly concerns, the eight worldly dharmas, gain and loss, pleasure and pain, praise and blame, fame and disgrace. Contemplate for a moment. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the suffering of samsara. So here it says in the text, it says, consider the suffering of beings in the six realms of samsara. Doing so, great fear and dread arise in the heart. In the three lower realms, and even in the three higher ones, there is not an instant of absolute happiness. I will avoid the root cause of my samsaric existence and practice the excellent path of peace to enlightenment. So, we've talked a number of times about samsara, the ocean of suffering. So this first line says, consider the suffering of beings in the six realms of samsara. We talked about the six human realms, the ocean of the wheel of existence, where there were the three higher realms and the three lower realms. So here in the italics below, it describes the three higher realms of samsara as being the Deva God realm, or the worldly God realm, the Azura demigod realm, or the Titan realm, or the jealous God realm, and the human realm. And in the three lower realms, we talk about the animal realm, we talk about the Preta, hungry ghost realm, and the hot and cold hell realms. So these are the six human realms that are the psychophysical drama that each of us are going through in our lifetime. Sometimes we might be very immersed in the hungry ghost realm, or sometimes maybe even the hell realm, or sometimes the animal realm. Other times we may be very immersed in the God realm, the worldly God realm, or the Azuran realm, the jealous God realm. And through all this is the human realm, the realm of the experience of all this, being the human being. This is the psychophysical drama of being a human being. The difference between these realms is that in the human realm is that we are able to make change, where the other realms, the beings in those realms, or those parts of our humanness are so obsessed with what it is that we're doing that we're not able to recognize the suffering that we're going through. So we're not able to make the change. As a human being, we develop a humility, we develop an awareness of ourselves, and we take responsibility for what it is that we're doing, and we are able to embody the wisdom that we need to make the changes, to have the compassion for ourselves, which in turn has compassion for all other beings. But this is based on ourselves. This is what we are recognizing. These are the four thoughts that turn our mind to the Dharma. So this has to come before we even start thinking about doing for other beings. So in the human realm, in the human suffering, we need to understand that a little bit more. So it says here that there's three levels of suffering in the human realm. We'll start with the all-pervading suffering of composite phenomena. So the all-pervading suffering of composite phenomena. So that's very abstract. And what that means is that when we are able to transcend our ordinary mind and we're able to begin to see these six realms, we begin to see this human drama, that we are actors in this human drama, that we begin to recognize the all-pervading suffering, that no matter who we are, no matter what we are doing, no matter what stage of our life we're in, that we are in this ocean of suffering, that we can always be pulled back and pulled down into this suffering, into these obsessions and so on. We can achieve levels of what we call nirvana, which is the other side of the hand of samsara. Samsara being the ocean of suffering, and nirvana being the temporary liberation from that suffering, the temporary liberation from that. When we're feeling happy, when we're feeling good, when we're feeling joyous, when we have activated some degree of bodhicitta, loving kindness and compassion, joy and equanimity, we have this nirvana, this feeling of satisfaction. But it's temporary and can easily be pulled back. So we have to be ever vigilant on what it is that we're doing to be able to maintain that happiness. So it takes an evolved person to be able to recognize that, and to be able to recognize that not just for themselves, but that all beings are going through this too. And that we meet our friends, we meet relatives, we meet strangers, people that we might meet in business or professional and so on like that. And in our conversations, we might begin to recognize them as to what their levels of suffering are, or what their levels of happiness are. And it would invoke, this wisdom, it would invoke this compassion within ourselves for these beings. And so it takes a special being, it takes an evolved being to be able to recognize that. Also, with the animals and with the insects and with all the rest of nature and all the catastrophes that happen on the planet, and to be able to see all the things that are happening in nature and the cosmos and so on, is all part of this play, are part of this cosmic chaos that seems to be going on, that is just the temporary nature of all these things. And we have a particular point of view at which we are looking at all this. But this point of view is very conditioned. It's conditioned on our experience. It's conditioned on what we've learned and so on. And it's quite possible that if we change our point of view, everything looks very different. So a very, if when we are looking out at the sky, for instance, the nighttime sky, and we see all the stars, and all the scientists are looking with their radio telescopes and with their optical telescopes and all the different things that they have to examine the heavens, and they've created this picture for themselves of what they think it is. But if the scientists were able to transport themselves to another location in the solar system, if they could get themselves, say, 90 degrees away from where we are right now and look at everything, it all might look very, very different to them. It would look very different to us. In the same way, in our little microcosm, when we are examining life and seeing life as we experience and so on, if we were to look at it in terms of what our children think of it, if we would look at it in terms of what our parents have thought about it, if we look at it at what people halfway around the world might look at it, and try and look at it from their points of view, from their experience levels and everything, it would look quite different to us as we experience it through their eyes and so on. So it takes someone who has an elevated, who has an evolved point of view to be able to recognize that, to be able to see that. So we call that the all-pervading suffering of composite phenomena, of being able to see it in all these different permutations and so on. So not only do they see the suffering, but they see the causes of the suffering. And they see the actions that beings are taking with these causings that are being conditioned by their surroundings and by things that are happening around them and so on. And then they are having these very, what would seem to be very predictable results. Sometimes we encounter something that will surprise us. And both on the good side, the positive side, and on the negative side. So we have to be aware of that. And as human beings, we have to adapt. We can adapt. And whether or not we can help other beings through our wisdom and through our skillful means to help other beings adapt. So then the next level here is called the suffering of change. So for us, it means that when we are born and we are going through all these changes, we're learning how to walk, we're learning how to talk, we're learning how to feed ourselves, we're learning how to read and write, we're learning all these things, and all these changes are coming to us, and they're wonderful. They're thrilling to us. We're so excited about them all. Everything is so new and fresh to us. But we're also learning things that are imprinted on our relatives, on our mothers and fathers, our families, and they are teaching these things to us. And sometimes they're not so good. We may not recognize them as being positive or good at that time, but we're receiving those imprints, and those imprints we carry on in our lives with our predilections and our prejudices and our judgments and so on that we're making on life and like that. And it's not until sometime a little bit later in our lives when we can learn about responsibility and taking responsibility for making changes in our life. So when we recognize what it is to tell a lie, or what it is to get mad, or what it is to want to do something good for somebody, or do something bad, and then we're taught through our parents and our friends, and to that we can make changes. That, oh well, I thought this was the way it was supposed to be done, but I can change and I can have a better result like that. So we begin to understand that we have the responsibility of making all these changes, and all these things are happening to us. As things get a little bit more dramatic for us, as we're getting a little bit older, and maybe as we're a young child and we're riding our bike and we fall and we break a bone or something like that. Up to that point, we thought we were invincible. We didn't know you could break a bone. We didn't recognize that. But then when you break your arm or something, you realize, wow, how vulnerable I am, and how your life now changes, and how you have to think about, protecting yourself in all these different ways. So there's many ways in which we can injure ourselves. There's many ways that we get sick, and we begin to see all these things as change, the suffering of change that we go through. And then there's a very dramatic change when we become teenagers. We go from being a child and become an adolescent, and all these different things start happening to us. Our body starts changing, our thought process starts changing, and it's very confusing. It's a turbulent time for us. And we think that we are like adults. We begin to have the body of an adult, and we begin to have more adult thoughts and so on. But with it comes this responsibility, and teenagers can be very, very irresponsible and not realizing, and all it takes is one mistake that can really change the rest of their lives. And so we as parents, as friends, try and protect them, try and warn them, try and educate them about these things. But it's when we fail ourselves and we go through these changes ourselves, and we realize the significance and on how powerful those things can be. Then when we get to be young adults, we start, we're in our 20s and our 30s, and the changes that we go through in our, now we have our own families maybe, or we have jobs and we have other responsibilities. Maybe we want to travel, all the things that we do in our life that is promoting all these changes, but then all the mistakes that can come along with those changes when we make wrong decisions and so on, and having to take responsibility for them. And things become much bigger, things become much greater, have much more ramifications. Having 3 or 4 or 5 credit cards and running up, astronomical credit card debt and so on. And now, what do you mean I just can't get rid of it? What do you mean I just can't make a phone call and get rid of this? What do you mean I can't, go to my parents and they're going to give me money and bail me out of this? You mean this is going to stay with me for the next 10 or 15 years till I pay off all this money? And so all this change comes to us, this change of responsibility of being an adult and doing things in the adult world and so on. And then when we get to our 30s and 40s and 50s, now our body really begins to change again, where, now the things that we used to be able to heal from, sickness or injury, we used to be able to shrug right off and be able to get over in a few days or a week or something like that, now has a much longer time period for us, because our bodies don't heal as fast as they used to. Our bodies aren't as strong as they used to be. And our emotions get very strong too. We got very we really buy into, we invest ourselves into our families and into our careers and into our friendships and so on. And when things don't work out for us, it can really be very, very catastrophic. So all this kind of change in our bodies, change in our attitudes, change in the things that are happening to us. And then as we get a little bit older, we get into our 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Now we really start going through some much more profound change in the way of our bodies are changing. We're much closer to the end of our lives than we've ever been before. And the realization of our impermanence becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. We probably have been to a number of funerals, and friends have passed away, families passed away. We start thinking about when we're going to pass away. All these things start coming to our minds. Fear starts developing and so on. And And then we start thinking about, well, what can I do to change my attitude towards these things if we're getting very emotional about these things, if we're losing our sense of balance because we don't understand where we are and our fear is just growing and getting deeper. And, are there other paths? Are there other things that I can look toward, that I can ask for help, or that I can engage in, that will help me to understand better? Or do I just get deeper and deeper into my ignorance, into my not thinking about these things, of suppressing the things that seem emotional to me, the things that seem confusing to me, the things that I don't understand, and I just get into my own conceit, my own arrogance, and thinking, well, I've got it all figured out. I've reached this age now, and now everything is perfect. But then all of a sudden something happens to change that, and you realize your vulnerability again. Maybe you have a bad injury, or maybe you have a bad illness, or maybe someone really close to you passes away, or maybe you have a change of fortune in your lives. Maybe something happens with your investments, your physical and your money investments, or any of these things. And then, so these changes are all happening. And we talk about that every 10 years or so, there's a big change. So if you start looking at when you're, a young child, and you go through these things that happen to you, these conditions that happen to you, and if you don't learn lessons from them, that you go to your next 10 years as a teenager, and these things come round again. These circumstances come round again. And do you make a wise decision with these situations, or do you make the same childish decision that you made when you were a child? So if you're able to solve the problem, then that's very good. You kind of evolve. But if you go to your 20s, now that situation comes around again. All these different situations come around again. And do you solve them, or do you continue to solve them as a child with childish behavior? Are we maturing? Are we learning things? Are we able to adapt and able to predict things, and be able to anticipate things by seeing conditions coming together? Sometimes it's not until we're in our 30s or in our 40s or even in our 50s or later, or maybe we never even recognize these things, that we're able to understand and see these changes that go around every 10 years. We sometimes talk about, well, this is like deja vu. I feel like I've been in this situation before. I've met these people before. I know this situation. And, but you don't have much time to contemplate it, to think about it. All of a sudden you're put into that situation now, and you got to act. So the question becomes, do you act like a child? Do you act like a teenager or whatever? Or are you acting like a more mature person and be able to make wiser decisions? So, so if you examine this and look at this and contemplate this, you'll experience this. You'll be able to see this in your own life and so on, how these changes come about and whether or not you meet the changes. Sometimes you'll meet children, or maybe you were one of those people who at 5 years old was wise beyond your years. Sometimes you'll meet a child like that, that just, and they have, their proclivities. They have their karma, we would say. They have, something that they bring with them that makes them wise beyond their years. Or maybe they have the proclivities to do terrible things, maybe to do good things. Maybe they have to learn how to do those things. Maybe we had to learn to do things. Maybe we had those proclivities that were like that. Maybe we had talents or just points of view that were very, very good or very, very bad. So we begin to see these changes. We begin to recognize these changes and the suffering of changes that we go through. So then there is the suffering of suffering. So this is more mundane suffering. This is the suffering that we all go through, that all beings go through, all when we say sentient beings. sentient beings are described as those beings that have a lifetime, that are born, that go through a period of time, and then they finally get old and begin to deteriorate, and finally have a death, and then decompose and so on, go back to their basic elements and so on. So whether it's human beings or it's animals or it's insects, beings that are invisible to us, beings that are in the oceans, beings that are subterraneous to us, below the ground. Maybe there's beings in the air above that we don't see that are invisible that way. Maybe there's beings all around the cosmos that we don't recognize, that we don't know, and so on. And maybe there's beings between us that we don't recognize. So these beings, the way we identify them as sentient beings is, are they born? Are they suffering? Do they go through suffering of sickness, suffering of injury, suffering like that? Do they have old age? Do they begin to deteriorate? And do they go through death? Do they have a death? The more evolved these beings might be, the more they have the emotions of what it is to be at each one of these stages, and particularly in the death, because the death, we may be a very evolved person who has a great awareness, who has a great spirituality awareness, but yet there's still an unknown quantity or quality of life of what our death is going to be. And that can bring about a deep despair and fear within ourselves. So there's suffering in that. There's suffering in birth. There's suffering in sickness. There's suffering in old age, and there's suffering in death. So even if we feel that we're totally prepared, there still may be just a little bit of an inkling of fearfulness, of suffering, of what that's going to be. Is it going to be a painful death? Is it going to be an easy death? Is it going to be a early death? Is it going to be a later death? Do I have to go through a lot of old age suffering to get to my final death? So all these things begin to compound. So these are the four sufferings of sentient beings. But then human beings have now another four sufferings that we should contemplate. And the four sufferings that are unique to human beings, beyond just being a sentient being, is that we are suffering from the separation from loved ones. When we're not with loved ones, our emotion of not being with the ones that we love, not being with our friends, not being in our home, not being in places that we want to be, not being with our loved ones, that kind of suffering. And some people have great despair when they're not with their loved ones like that, their children or their parents, and so their friends. So you can imagine what that is. I'm sure if you take a few minutes and contemplate that, you'll totally understand what that means. But then there is another suffering of having to endure those who are not dear to us. So what that means is being in the midst of people, of situations that we don't like. Have you ever gone to a cocktail party where you were invited, you're alone? There's 40 people there, but you don't know anybody. Nobody knows you, and you really don't like these people. You don't want to be there. Maybe it's a business cocktail party or something like that. And you have to sit, and that's the longest 2 hours that you could ever experience. Maybe you've been out, on a date or something like that. Or maybe you've been in a business meeting. All these different things that can happen, when you have to be with those that you don't like. I remember when I first went into the Army and had to go through basic training. And the first weeks were totally miserable because I didn't know anybody. I didn't like anybody. They cut my hair and gave me these funny looking clothes I had to wear and everything. And it took me a while to make new friendships, but those few weeks before were terrible. So you can imagine, what it is, you've experienced that, of what it is to endure those beings that you don't like. So imagine being that for a very long time. Imagine being like that for a year or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, or, periods even longer. So, we've all experienced being with those that we don't like, and that's a human suffering. Then there's the suffering of not finding what we desire, not getting what we desire. So whether it's a relationship or whether it's material possessions, but constantly being on the lookout, constantly seeking, constantly having to try different things and acquiring different things, and having to put money on my, charges on my charge card, and then finding out that I don't like this thing, and now I got to still continue to pay for this thing. Or you get your new car, and you finally, you got this car, you've been wanting this car for a long, long time. It was more money than you wanted to pay for it, but you got it anyway. And you had to pay for the insurance, you had to do all these things. And you go to the supermarket, and you go inside and you come back out and you see somebody took one of the supermarket carts and just rammed it up against the side of the car. And now you got this thing that you wanted so much, and now it's damaged, and your heart just feels broken. So it's not finding what you want, and then having to protect it becomes the next thing. Now we've got this thing, and now we got to protect it. Now we got to get the insurance for it. We got to pay for it. We got to do this. I got to have the right garage, for my car. All these things. So the suffering of having to find these different things, of, how does it say, how not finding what we desire, and then having to protect what we already have. So these are human sufferings. And it's good to have a sense of humor about it, isn't it? But when it's happening to you, it's very difficult to do that. It's very difficult. We get obsessed. We get blinded by these things and so on. But these are very human things, and it goes through our whole life. And the thing about, no matter who we are, it seems to me, no matter who we are, we still get blindsided. We still think that we've got success, but then something happens and just seems to turn our world upside down. Maybe it's only for a few hours, or maybe it's for a couple days or something like that. Maybe it's longer. Things can happen. An accident can happen. Illness can happen that just changes the whole rest of your life. Things can happen. So we have to be prepared for these things. We have to be emotionally prepared for these things. We have to be spiritually prepared for these things. If we don't have a good spirit to be able to be a cushion to this, to give us an overview of this, these things can be catastrophic. Even if we can intellectualize and rationalize these things happening to us, it still weighs on us. But if we have a good spirituality about it, then there's more understanding, there's more balance there. And it goes back to being a complete human being, our physical body, our intellectual body, and our spiritual body. If we have our spiritual body, we can say, oh, well, I really didn't need that anyway. But sometimes that's pretty difficult to do. But the older we get, I think the easier that gets to be able to say and to be able to actualize in your life. And we begin to make choices like that. So back to the text. It says, consider the suffering of beings in the 6 realms of samsara. Doing so, great fear and dread arise in the heart. So as we are thinking about these things, and as we are experiencing those different realms of being a human being, and during our lifetime, having to go through the drama now of experiencing, of being a hungry ghost, being insatiable, or losing things, and losing our pride, and our greediness isn't working for us anymore. We lost what we were being greedy for, and so on. Or maybe we we did something that really harmed somebody, we feel like we're in a hell, emotionally in a hell realm, or like an animal. So we need to constantly be evaluating, looking at these things, examining these things, so that great fear and dread don't arise in the heart, that we protect the heart through our spirituality. The intellectualism protects us to some degree, but we can still have this feeling in our heart, this hole in our heart that is there, that only a good spiritual nature can heal that. So then it also says, in the three lower realms and even in the three higher ones, there is not an instant of absolute happiness. So in these three lower realms and the three higher ones, there is not a time when there is just absolute happiness. The worldly gods has their problems. The jealous gods have their problems. We know the human beings have their problems. The animals and the hungry ghosts and the hell beings, they all have their problems, and they don't have an absolute moment of happiness on which to be able to abide within. They're always in this constant churning, this constant change. So it says, I will avoid the root cause of my samsaric existence. So the root cause of my samsaric existence, why is it that we are in this situation? What is the root cause of this ocean of suffering that we are in? So whether it is because of things that we've done in our early life, which we did, 2 years ago or 6 months ago or yesterday, at this point right now, it doesn't really matter. Now we have this situation that we are in, and now we have to decide what it is that we're going to do to transform this situation, regardless of how we got here. So the next part of the sentence says, and practice the excellent path of peace to enlightenment. So what that means is that regardless of how we got here, now we're in this situation. Now the only way out of this is by liberating ourselves from any attachment, any aversion we have to this situation, cutting things off, learning how to compartmentalize, to compartmentalize different things and so on, so that we can logically work through them and so on, and maintain a mindfulness of peacefulness in that process as we do that. So we avoid the root cause of our samsaric existence by practicing the excellent path of peace to enlightenment. So the enlightenment is the awareness of all these vicissitudes, awareness of all these things, of the human suffering, of the suffering of nature, the phenomenal suffering, the nirvana, the reality of what we would say the two truths, the relative truth that all things are changing, all things is phenomenal, and that there is this absolute serenity, there is this absolute peacefulness that we can attain through our practice, through our meditation. And we have glimpses of that as we get stronger in our practices, in our meditation, and being able to transcend all these chaotic seeming things, and be able to see these all as just the play of being a human being in the ocean of suffering, and that we can attain a level of nirvana until we can totally liberate when we pass away, when we drop our physical body, when we drop our intellect, and then our spirit is ejected, and then being able to have our spirit be in that pure nature, to be completely free, and not to be born again into the ocean of suffering, or if it is born into the ocean of suffering, which is likely to be, that we have control, that we come into this life again now as a more evolved person, as a more intelligent person, as a more spiritual person who has a stronger bodhicitta, loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. So now we come and we're helping other beings more. We're more fruitful in our work and helping to help ourselves and to help other beings. So this would be the enlightenment, to know that we are part of this continuum. We are part of this continuum that is flowing through us, and that we are just, like passengers on this. But we can add either harmony to it, or we can add disharmony to it. We can interrupt it, and we can make it difficult for ourselves or make it difficult for others. So the goal is to recognize what this continuum is and to be able to learn how to harmonize with it, And so the more that we experience the spirituality of it, the more that we experience the bodhicitta, the fearfulness goes away, the anxiety goes away, and we realize that it's just loving kindness, it's just compassion, it's just joy, it's just equanimity. The thing is, we got to simplify our lives. It's through all our confusion that we're making all this disharmony, all this discordant interruptions that are happening and so on. We just have to learn to be peaceful. We learn how to simplify, how to be happy and so on, instead of making ourselves miserable. So this is the suffering of samsara in 20 minutes or so. So does anybody have any comments or questions? Does this make sense? Can you see these points? Okay.
I wondered with, you were talking about the spirit.
Yes.
And that brought in my thought is reincarnation.
Yes.
And what is it that is the belief about what carries through from one from one body to the next body? Is it a mental thing, or is it a spiritual thing, or is it a combination of each, or what?
Well, we're going to talk about that next. That's karma, cause and effect. We're going to talk about that next. So let's hold on a minute and we'll get right there. Anybody else have a comment on suffering of samsara?
Yeah, I'm really suffering. Can we move on?
Okay.
This is to meditate on suffering. It's like just wallow in misery. But no, I mean, I get it. I get it. This is I think understanding where we're at to accept all the perturbations of our situation in the moment and in this life. It's really important. So often we walk through life not knowing that we're suffering most of the time, and not knowing that there's a relief is just around a corner, or just a step away. So when I first heard about this being one of the thoughts to turn our mind to the Dharma, I didn't think this. I thought the suffering was like the lesser item to turn to, but now I understand that I've been walking around blind for 60 years, not knowing how much pain there is, and self-centered to the point where if there is pain, it's me, and I whine about things that aren't real, and my real suffering is something that I don't recognize because it's not only is it my blindness and my illusion, but my blindness doesn't let me see that. So it's like a double indemnity. So I appreciate going through these four things over and over again. So I think I'll stick around for the next version of 101 and 102 as well. It just bears remembering and reminding. So thank you.
We often cloak our suffering in celebration, I think. I catch myself doing that, and as I watch people in big crowds and small groups and as individuals, I think poetry has been written about it. What was the song many years ago? The Tears of a Clown. But we pretend that we're not suffering. We've become very versatile at pretending we're not suffering.
We rationalize.
Mm-hmm.
And we live the lie that we weave for ourselves. Grin and bear it. So some people would say, like what Michael said, oh, why do I got to think about this suffering? He was kidding, of course. But, the Buddhists, we got to look at these things. We got to, because these are the hidden things that, as Gary is saying, that are what's blindsiding us and causes us to be reborn again back into a life of suffering, continually. And to William's question, how do we take that with us? So we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But yes, we need to recognize the suffering. We need to recognize that suffering is part of our nature. It's part of being a human being. It's part of being a sentient being. And we need to recognize it for what it is. If we don't recognize it, we can't fix it. So then we begin to learn, what is it that makes the suffering? What is it that is the result of the suffering, or how it manifests, so that now we have the power to be able to apply the antidote to the suffering, so that we don't have the suffering and that we attain the happiness, which is the nirvana. So we are dualistic beings, suffering, happiness. We have a choice. So we need to be able to understand, where that deep suppressed suffering is, so that we can release that, so that it really can be a life of happiness more and more for ourselves, that we can stabilize that more and more. So it comes through circumspection. So as you see on the bottom of this page, number 4, it says contemplate. So just like we contemplated on precious human life, and we contemplated on impermanence, we would contemplate on the suffering of samsara. So this is a practice that we do every day. This is part of our practice routine, that we begin by doing our opening prayers to set our motivation. And then we do these prayers, or these statements of the 4 thoughts that turn the mind to the Dharma, to kind of give us a snapshot of where I am right now, this moment, today, and then, so that as we continue our practice, as we move from these 4 thoughts, now we're either using the happiness that we got from recognizing these 4 thoughts, or the lessons that we learn from the suffering of these 4 thoughts as we move forward into our practice for the day. So it's very important. So whether we are an ordinary practitioner or we are the Dalai Lama, we recite these prayers every day to ourselves to help us center ourselves, to remind ourselves. So does anybody need a short break, or we can continue talking? Okay. Rebecca, you want to take a minute? Or you have something to say?
I unmuted. Yes, I would actually like to take a break for just a moment.
Okay, please come back soon. Okay. All right. Anybody else? Any other questions or something I can answer?
Lance,
Yes, sir.
did you hear that our new Secretary of State is a rock and roller?
Was that right?
Yeah, he's got a band.
No kidding.
Yeah, he's got some songs on Spotify. He's good.
Oh,
Yeah, he plays a Fender.
oh. He was Undersecretary of State during Obama's time, wasn't
Yes.
he? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's great.
Always nice to have a musician in the house.
Yes, indeed. I think we need a comedian on the cabinet too. I think we ought to get Bill Maher in there, Secretary of Happiness, of Laughter.
I like that idea. Yeah.
I think wasn't he? He was actually Deputy National Security Advisor. I think, not Under Secretary of State, but I'm not real sure.
Yeah, I read his bio. I'm not sure. No.
You're probably right. I don't know. I saw that he had an important position. I thought it was under secretary. That's why I noticed. But I was walking by the TV when I saw that. So.
Yeah, he's been with Biden in one capacity or another for a couple of decades, and still pretty fairly very young guy for apparently no nonsense. Putin has seen him coming before, apparently, and knows that he can't blow the smoke by him that he's been blown by these other guys.
Yeah, well, I think we're all looking forward to this change coming.
We can only hope. We'll have to see. There's a lot to happen yet.
Yeah. All right. Is Bonnie with us? Everybody back together? Okay, there she is. I see her. Okay. All right, so now we move to page 5, where we talk about karma. And karma also is the cause, karma, and result or effect. So karma is a Sanskrit word that means action. And before you have an action, there needs to be a cause. There needs to be a thought at the very least that precipitates another thought, or that precipitates some kind of an action. And then that action then yields some kind of a result, a positive result or a negative result, or something in between there. So we need to understand what karma is, cause and effect. Karma, cause and effect. So when you think of karma, you need to think of the cause of karma, you need to think of the result of karma, and karma is an action. So now it says here in the text, it says, even if one were a king at the time of one's death, one's possessions, enjoyments, friends, and retinue will not follow. But wherever that sentient being goes, his karma follows after him like a shadow. So this goes to the question that William was asking: how does this work? How does this, move with these entities, beings, whatever you want to call them? How does this happen? So it then says here, the fruit of one's positive karma is happiness. Suffering is the fruit of negative karma. The inexorable karmic causation is the mode of abiding in all dharmas. So inexorable here, it tells us that it is that which cannot be moved by influence or persuasion. So it's a law. It's a truth. It's something that we have to recognize, much in the same way that we had to recognize gravity, or the same that we had to recognize electromagnetism, or that we have to recognize the strong force, the strong atomic force, or the weak force, the weak atomic force. These are all invisible, but through physics, through science, we can measure these and so on in physical science, because that's what they're related to. However, in spirituality, there is a law of karma. There is a law of action and reaction, or action and result. So the sooner that we can recognize and be responsible for that law that we are engaging in all the time, we are, excuse me, we are the actuators of that particular law. Whereas with karma, with gravity, we have an emotional gravity, or we have some kind of an intellectual gravity, but we're not attracting each other just because of the mass of our bodies. And the same thing through electromagnetism and so on, like that. But through the emotions, through the spirit, through there is a cause and result that happens, and we need to recognize that. So it says the fruit of positive karma is happiness. Suffering is the fruit of negative karma. We see the results of karma that is undeniable. If we do good things happen. If we do bad things happen. And we can apply good things to bad things and have a good result. And likewise, we can have a bad thing happening, a bad cause, but apply a good result and transform, or rather, mix it up, have a good thing happening and then apply a bad action to it and have a bad result. So it can go in all those different directions. So it says the inexorable karmic causation is the mode of abiding in all dharmas. So abiding in all dharmas means abiding in all the different pathways and all the different things that we do in our lives, all the different ways in which we act and behave and think and so on. So then it says, henceforth, practice the Dharma by distinguishing between what should be practiced and what should be given up. So it says, practice the Dharma with a capital D, the Buddha Dharma, by distinguishing between what should be practiced and what should be given up. So we need to recognize that these negative things just at some point just simply need to be just abandoned, just need to be cut off, need to be satisfied in some way so that they don't continue to arise and interrupt us and cause more havoc in our lives and so on. We have to take control of those things. Likewise, if there's good things that are happening, happiness, we have to stabilize that behavior, stabilize those thoughts so that that good result is constantly happening for it. That becomes, the new way in which our life continues on and on and on with happiness. So this karma, these causes, are characterized in the 6 realms of samsara, the 6 human realms. This is where we can see the results of karma. In other words, we can take a look at our own life and see what kind of karma do we have in this life? What kind of karma do we have right now to be right where we are? And if we can look at that, then we can look at, well, where were we when we were younger? What kind of karma did we have? How much karma did we have to transform? How many causes did we have to take? There was negative propensities that we had. There was positive propensities that we had in our lives. And what did we do with those things to get us to where we are right now? And where we are right now, what is it that we need to do to be able to get us to where we want to be? Where do we want to be? Do we want to be happy? Do we want to be suffering? Do we want to be sad? Do we want to be a mixture in between? Are we satisfied with that? Oh, I'll take 80% happiness and take 20% suffering. Okay, so if you do that, then what's the 80% happiness going to be? And what's the 20% suffering going to be? Because we really have control over all of that as we move forward and so on. We need to recognize that. So one of the questions that has always been asked the Buddha and the wise teachers that have come after the Buddha is what's said here in the italics. It says, the Buddha said when asked, what was my previous life? And the Buddha's reply was, what you are now is what you have been. And what you will be is what you do now. That's the question you should be asking. What do I want to be? How do I be that? And only you can answer that question by looking at the things that you do. Are you doing good things? So how does this work? There are 8 levels of consciousness. The first 6 levels are pretty easy to explain. We have sight consciousness. We have nose consciousness, smell. We have taste consciousness. We have hearing consciousness. And we have touch consciousness. So these are just receptors that are just being aware of the objects of their organs, of what they see, just, devices that recognize this phenomena that we're in the midst of. And they all are connected to the brain. And the brain is making a mental consciousness of being able to process all these things into sensations and reactions and putting things together, identifying puzzle pieces. It looks like this, it sounds like this, it tastes like this, these kinds of things. So we're processing all this stuff in the brain. So there's mental consciousness that is able to take these sensors and now process it to mean something to us. So those are the first 6 consciousnesses. Then the 6th consciousness is what we would call our higher consciousness of awareness. Just a minute, I want to make sure I say something correct and not get too far off here. Sorry, I'll be with you in just a second. I had this here right here before. What did I do with it? Okay, so the six consciousness I just went through. I got myself off track just a little bit. So the seventh consciousness now is what we call the I, me, mine consciousness. And this is the consciousness of karma. This is the consciousness of recognizing that I am doing things and I am making things happen and change and so on. And that I'm aware of me. I'm aware of I'm aware of mine, aware of all this that I'm doing and seeing all this as a temporary manifestation of being, of the brain, of this existence, and it's all temporary. And I see this as the actor. I am the actor in this play and doing these different things and so on. I, me, mine. We call this the kleshas. These karmas are accumulating. These different positive karmas, these negative karmas. So we can see them on a very short scale sometimes. If we do, if we're in our family and we get upset with our family, whether we're right or wrong, but if we get upset, it has a reaction in the family. And then that family then has another reaction to you. And there's this dynamic of these karmas flying around now. This consciousness now. Oh, I didn't know that you could say something like that. Oh, you really hurt me. Oh, I didn't know I could do that. You know, I'm really sorry for that. Or I just stay mad for the next 3 days or something like that. So you can see that there was something that precipitated this anger. There was a cause for this anger. And now I have become the embodiment of that karma, of that action, of that thing that happened. Maybe I went out and I was so mad, I got in the car and I drove off and I got into an accident. And now I got to deal with that accident now as a result of my anger. Or maybe it's jealousy, or maybe it's greediness. It's any one of the all combinations of the 5 poisons that we've talked about so many times that make up the 84,000 emotions. So these emotions are all causes for karma. And what do we do with that? You know, what do we do with those causes? What do we do to have an antidote for them? Or is there no antidote and they just precipitate this action that is an emotional action that then becomes an emotional result? It becomes more stuff. Maybe it's good stuff. Maybe it's, oh, you know, you do these things and people really respect you and they really like you and they want to be with you. And because you've done these good things and so on. But it has to, but it's the I, me, mine. I'm recognizing that I'm doing this and that I'm accumulating the results of this. So it can be something that can be very, traceable. We can see that there was this cause, there was this result, there was this action, and then there was this result, and it happened in a very small time frame. However, there can be karma that is part of this continuum, that we are on. And this continuum can be thought of in very loose terms as a means of a simile, to say that we had lives prior, whether your name was different. You might have been a male or a female. You might have been an animal. You might have been an insect. You might have been all these things at different times, because all these things are happening simultaneously, and they are from time immemorial that does not end. And we're all part of that. It's part of this thing that we are all part of, this phenomenal nature that we see, that we experience, this relative nature that we are experiencing, but we can't deny that it is all made up of the same stuff. If we look at it materially, it's all gets down to atomic structure, and then subatomic, if you want to go to that. But then if we, from the atomic, then it goes up into molecules. And then from molecules, then it goes up into tissues and other stuff that, organic stuff, but maybe it just stays as inorganic stuff like rocks and things like that, But what were rocks before? Were rocks fire? Were rocks, was it matter that has solidified now? Were they on the bottom of an ocean at one point? How many times was it an ocean? How many times was it on fire? All these things we don't have, good answers for, but we know that there's been all this turbulation that has been happening on this particular planet that we're all part of. And we know that those building blocks of what we are, the same building blocks that all this nature is part of, that is all relative. It's all compounded of stuff. And we look at it in terms of other things that brought it together and so on. What is absolute? What is an absolute independent thing that we can say this is the essence of what it is to be a human being, to be Lance or to be Tom or to be Rebecca or to be any one of us? Is there an essence that is any one of these things? So we can say, well, no, it's all relative. It's just all compounded stuff. So why do we attach to all this stuff then? Why do we attach it if it's all relative? Why do we make it out to be permanent? Why do we allow ourselves to be confused by it? And then we create these attachments, and then we create these emotions and so on, because we buy into this, and we separate ourselves from others because we think that we're special and they're not. So all these dynamics begin to build up, with this confusion of who we are, of what the I, me, mine is. So we become this collection of things. So from the past, and what about the future? Well, this continuum is just continuing, and this continuum has no beginning and has no end. It is just this continuum, and it's just a simile. It's just a way for us to, at this point in our minds, to be able to imagine, to be able to visualize where we are in terms of all of this. So we have all this stuff happening. And so there's been all these actions, there's been all these causes, and there's all these results that we are all part of, and that we continue to allow to go, and so on. So now we say, okay, well, how does this accrue from one life to another? If there is this continuum, is there one life, like William is asking, is there one life that accrues? Do some of these things, is there an imprint to this energy? If there is this force, if there is this nature, if there is this spirit, if there is this entity, or whatever you want to call it, that is Lance or is anybody here, does this all imprint someplace? So we call this the Alaya consciousness. This is the ground of all consciousness, is what the Alaya means. Alaya is a Sanskrit word. So in Buddhism, this is the way they explain it. So this is similar, I think, to what our notion of what the soul is. That the soul can be stained. And the stain is with the sins, with the negativity that we have. Or the soul can be exalted with the good things, and it can radiate and so on with the good things that we do. But is this soul, is this alaya consciousness something that we have fabricated for ourselves? Is this a rationalization? Is this a wish? Is this something that we need to be able to hold on to for our extreme view of eternalism, for our extreme view of individualism, for our understanding of the extreme view of materialism, in fear of nihilism? So, like everything else that we think about is a concept. Everything else that we think about is relative. Everything is fabricated. So why wouldn't this be one of those things? Why wouldn't the alaya consciousness be that? Now, if we think it, because I'm a human being and I'm great, it must be true. Or can we let it go? And has it become one of the things that I say, you know what? I just don't know. And just like everything else in our lives, it just becomes impermanent. It is just a device, a figment of our intelligence to be able to manifest this so that we can hold on to something, to make ourselves permanent, to give us that sense of eternalism. And when we talked about before, we've talked about, we are three-dimensional beings. But does that mean that there's not 4 dimensions or 5 dimensions or 6 dimensions or 16 dimensions? But we just don't recognize it. So what we are doing as Dharma practitioners, as Buddha practitioners, we are preparing ourselves to be free of all conceptual things that hold us back. Does that soul, does that alaya consciousness, does that bring fear into your life? Does that bring anxiety? Does that arise a notion of, am I doing it right? Is that the reaction you want to have? So we try and be as pure as we can. We try and be as non-dual as we can. In the face of understanding, of recognizing or beginning to recognize, to examine, to experience the two nature, the two truth awareness, that there is two truths. We may not totally understand it, but we are going to have faith to be able to trust ourselves, trust our practice, trust our teachers, to be able to examine that, to be able to look at that possibility. And that is a liberation, I think, that we're no longer tied to this notion of the alaya consciousness that we are living in fear of. Oh, do I have a pure enough soul that I'm going to be judged? So the karma is a device You know, it is a force of nature, of relative nature, just like everything else is a force of nature that we see as relative. It's all part of phenomenal nature. The atoms are phenomenal. The tissues are phenomenal. The bones are phenomenal. The rocks are phenomenal. The atmosphere is phenomenal. The sun is phenomenal. All that's all phenomenal. It's all just, you know, figments of our imagination that we see this and we have created this story of what this all is. From our point of view, it seems very logical. We can convince ourselves, yes, it's true, from this point of view. But can you transcend this point of view as an ordinary human being into the true nature of the awakened, of the enlightened, and experience things from that point of view? And we come back and we say, I don't know what it was, but I love everybody and everybody loves me. and all this stuff just becomes trivial. And you realize it as trivial. You realize it all as figments of our imagination. And why hold on to these things? Why want these things? Why need these things? And if I do want these things and need these things, I do it with a sense of humor now. Oh, I got it for this space and time. It'll be here now for a while. Eventually this shirt's going to wear out. Eventually I got to get a new car. You know, all these things are going to change. You know, my body's going to give out one day. In the process, I might lose my eyes. I might go blind. I might lose my voice. My hair is all going to fall out. You know, all these things are going to happen on the way to completely dissolving as being a human being. So this is a explanation of the karma. The karma, in reality, does it exist? Does it, you know, move from one life to another? In this story, it does. But what's beyond the story? The story is just the story. Can you abide by that? So what do you say to that?
I remember as a child, Lance, before I even knew of the concept or heard of reincarnation, thinking, well, when I was here before this happened, or when I knew somebody before this happened, and I guess that's just kind of a karmic memory, whether I had words for it or label for it or not, that I was just experiencing.
The way I relate to it, I call it transpersonal. You know, we're tuning in. We're like radios, tuning into to stations.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, now that I, you know more about it and look back on it, I kind of think, well, that was pretty neat.
You know, and at this level, if we stay at this level, it's true. But if we can go to this level, it's not true anymore. It's only true at that level. It's true down here. It's true up to this point until you can go above it. You know, one man's floor is another man's ceiling.
Right.
I keep looking for a Post-it note that I had up above my desk. I don't know what I did with it. I may have to put it back. And it's I got it from a business book, but it just said, all models are wrong, but some are useful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all just tools that we're using.
I had an experience a number of years ago taking a class. They had us do that exercise where you stand and look in someone else's eyes, just another random person, for some period of time. And you're not communicating, you're just looking in the other person's eyes. And had the wildest experience of realizing that it's just a complete fluke that I woke up and I'm me this morning and I'm not Michael. You know, that I could have just as easily, and the man I was looking at during this exercise was, I don't know, probably 1.5 feet taller than me, outweighed me by 130 pounds, and was absolutely black, right? Like we could not have been more different. And all I could think was, yeah, I could have seen you when I looked in the mirror this morning, just as easy. It was very liberating.
Mhm. Mhm. So we contemplate this, this is what we contemplate every day, you know, precious human life, impermanence, the suffering of samsara, and karma. And the strongest thing here is the impermanence. The one thing that we can count on, the one certainty we have is impermanence as human beings. Everything else is just totally, negotiable. William, what do you think of that? Does that answer your question? I'm making him reach for the.
We got to unmute.
Having trouble unmuting.
Yeah.
No, I was talking to somebody a while back, and I have a feeling that when I go from this life to that life, I'm carrying my my karma with me.
Yeah. Sure.
And it's a combination of everything I thought, said, and done incorrectly
Okay.
comes with me.
Well, what about correctly? What happens to the correct stuff?
Well, the correct, it all comes with me, but this other fella said, well, no, you don't have any of the personalities in that you've got. It's entirely different. It's all mental. You got it all mental things. So coming across or coming through, it's like your personality and everything is hung up with this going that way also. So and they had a different thought on it, and it's the difference between not reincarnated, the difference between being reincarnated and the difference between being reborn. was the two different modalities. And I was just wondering how the Buddhism, the Tibetan Buddhism brought forth the reincarnation. Because I know that they do reincarnation because the what's his name?
Dalai Lama.
The Dalai Lama, you know, you realize that he's been incarnated, and they did a big run around to try to discover who he was and all of that. So.
Well, I mean, you know, it's like trying to understand energy and how energy manifests. And if energy is this indescribable, and then we slow the energy down, then it coalesces into matter, and then the matter takes on all these forms and so on. And then we ultimately come to be human beings, and then we create these narratives, we create these stories and so on. But as Bonnie said, these stories are helpful to be able to help us, you know, kind of put some things together, but also to, you know, realize at some point that we're going to let these things go. So, you know, questions like, how does a family, let's say they got two twins, and one of the twins starts playing the piano at 4 or 5 years old, and the other twin doesn't have any musical proclivity at all, but that other twin does. You know, also, how is it they became twins? You know, how does that work? Can karma manifest as in the gene pools as genetic? Is there a genetic karma? Is there a spiritual karma? You know, so the absolute answer to these questions are, we don't know. You know, we're in a position of enjoyment if we want to be, or we're in a position of denial or misery or whatever. You know, but it's a matter of being able to recognize that we are operating at this particular level, and that we become happy and satisfied with this particular level, and we do the work that we need to be at this particular level in a stable way, and tomorrow will take care of itself. If we try and overanalyze it, if we try and overdo it, we just get ourselves in a tizzy. We just make ourselves anxious. And it's letting it go. It's being free of a conceptual being, being free of a human being. If you had the choice, what kind would you want to come back as a human being, or would you want to come back as one of the other human realms? If it's possible that there is a distinct hell realm or a distinct God realm or whatever, would you want to be one or the other? Which one would you want to be? Or would you want to be something that is not, or would you want to be something that is not reincarnated at all and just remain
How about a Buddha?
as just pure nature, as just pure wisdom, as just pure energy, however you want to describe it, just pure love?
Well, you've got an interesting thing there, because the individuals that are planets or stars have their own thing that they're working out. You see, I think that everything is alive. And I don't know that central being and alive is the same in the context that I'm saying it, but the whole universe.
It's all vibrating. It's all vibrating.
The whole universe is in flow.
It's all
It's in
vibrating.
flux. Yeah.
Everything's moving,
Okay.
whether it's animate or inanimate, whether it's organic or inorganic. everything's
Exactly.
vibrating. There's something going, there's a dance going on.
Mhm. And we can I think that probably we have been these different pieces at one time or another. I'm in this for the long term. I don't, I believe that you can get out of here in a quick 20 minutes and not have to worry about coming back. But I also believe that if you've got any kind of a feel for the community that we are, you want to stay for the long haul. Personal beliefs,
Okay.
which could be total BS. And that's all right.
All right. Well, I'm sure we all have, our different views on this, and we can talk about it, but I think tonight we're kind of out of time. So I would like to talk about it anytime you want to. We can make a time and say that's what we're going to talk about. But I do want to finish up with this page number 6, because this kind of brings things together from the point of view of who we are, what we're trying to do within the Buddha Dharma. So if you look at that page and you see here are 3 symbols, 3 syllables. These are Sanskrit syllables that are also Tibetan syllables. The Tibetan language is based on the Sanskrit. And so the first one on the left is Om, and the next one in the middle is Ah, and the next one at the third one down is Hong. So, when we go Om, Ah, Hong, this is what we're doing. Om, the body, the speech, the mind, the Buddha, the body of the Buddha, the speech of the Buddha, the mind of the Buddha. So here it says, in English, it says Om, the chakra at the crown, the forehead, the crown, represents the body of the Buddha, the bliss nature of the Buddha. So we know what it is to have bliss. We've had bliss in our lives, 2 human beings together making love with our children, there's with our parents. There's been times when we've had a moment of bliss, and maybe that bliss has lasted, a longer time, and we've tried to make it last a long time, but we've all experienced bliss. It's a bliss of the body, of being a human being. And then the next one is the chakra at the throat. And this is the speech of the Buddha, which is the speech is a function of the brain. So it is the agent of the intellect when we say speech. So, and this is the unborn nature of the Buddhas. The unborn nature means that which is pure, so pure that it's unborn, that we have this wisdom that arises, that we can intellectualize and comes out. Most of what comes out is garbage, is stuff that we have fabricated for ourselves, and that's what we're regurgitating all the time. But there is this wisdom that we have within ourselves that comes up and then gets processed by the brain and then gets emitted. So where does this wisdom come from? This wisdom comes from the hung. The hung is the chakra at the heart. And this is the mind of the Buddha, the mind of the awakened one. We are all Buddha. We're not all awakened, but we all have the potential to be awakened. What's preventing us from being awakened is all the garbage that's covering up that mind, covering up that light. But if we can begin to purify, clear away all that stuff, then we start getting shards of light that start coming through, little flashes, glimpses of that truth that comes through, gets processed by the brain, gets recognized by the brain in some way, and comes out through our voice. So this is the wisdom mind of the Buddha. So when we're going Om Ah Hong, we're saying the body of the Buddha, the speech of the Buddha, the mind of the Buddha. We're saying the body, the Dharma, and or rather the Sangha. The Sangha is the body of the Buddha, the community of people that we're all sharing this. So the Sangha, the Dharma, which is the teaching of the Buddha, which is the verbalization of the heart of the Buddha, of the wisdom. So it's the body, the speech, and the mind, the Sangha, the Dharma, and the Buddha, the mind of the Buddha, like that. So why this is important is because what this is helping us to recognize is there is something that through our rational, everyday human mind, our human activities, our narratives, our stories that we create for ourselves, that all of this is just all operating at this level here. But there's much more that we are capable of operating at a much higher level, and that which is immeasurable, beyond our comprehension. And this Om Ah Hong is recognizing that this is our goal. This is what we're trying to open up ourselves up to, that our body, speech, and mind become inseparable with the body, speech, and mind of all the enlightened ones. And Buddha is just a name that we use, an arbitrary name that we use to connote what that is. So we hold on to our ideas, we hold on to these things, and we see that they are talking about different levels. We begin to recognize them for what they are. And they're useful. They're not bad. They don't have to be bad. We don't have to say they're bad. It's all part of being a human being. It's all part of that phenomenal nature, which is pure in its essence. We're the ones that make all the distinctions, whether it's bad or not. All the dualism comes from us. We look at anything and decide whether it's good or bad. So we got to start looking at everything like a Buddha. And just being free of the thought.
It's all for good.
Okay. So Any other questions?
I do have a question.
Okay,
Did somebody say there's a 102?
there's a 102, yes.
Okay.
So what we are going to do, I wanted to talk to you about this. 102 for us, there is a book, the Jewel Ornament Liberation, that we are in Buddhism 101 that we are getting to. And the Jewel Ornament Liberation is the basis of what we've been talking about here, but it's very prescribed. It's like a college level text. So there are still things that I would like to be able to cover in the way that we've been doing them. So in our next cycle, this is what, the 7th or the 8th cycle, 8th meeting? I've forgotten now. But what I would like to do is to start the new cycle. Tonight is the 8th. Okay, so this technically would end this cycle, which is appropriate for what we just finished and everything. And then I would like to go to the next cycle. I would like to repeat 101, but do it from the perspective of the Learning Buddhism book. We have a book called The Learning Buddhism that Khenpo Samdop has written, which is very good. And it is a conversational way at some of the main chapters of what the Jewel Ornament of Liberation is. We go through that book, and then the next cycle after that, then we would go through Buddhism 101, starting with the Jewel Ornament of Liberation, just with the first 6 or 7 chapters. And then 102 was the continuation of the Jewel Ornament of Liberation, getting into the higher chapters. So we need to get these fundamentals understood before we can get to that point. So if you've got patience to want to do that, that's wonderful, and we'll do that. But, so what do you think of that?
Is everybody looking at me?
Well, a couple of the people that are with us tonight are in the 102 as well.
Okay.
A number of the people have been with me, been doing this with us for the past couple of years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, it's kind of like once we start, we don't stop.
It's the song that never ends.
Yes. And it keeps on, I describe it as a spiral. It goes around a very big circle, but then it's ever getting tighter and tighter circle as it goes up and goes up and goes up until it gets to the pinnacle. And the pinnacle is the threshold of enlightenment. So the Jewel Ornament of Liberation is the manual to attain that enlightenment.
There's a user guide.
There's a user guide.
Lance, I think there's so much information in every night that we meet, which is more than we can absorb at one hearing. So it's really good to hear it over and over again.
Well, that's exactly right. That's what we all do. We're all taking teachings. Our teachers are taking teachings. Mm-hmm. I'm taking teachings. We're all taking teachings, and most important, we're all doing. We're doing practice, and that's the thing. That's what we're trying to inspire people to do, is to develop their practice, because otherwise, it's just, it's just vicarious experience, learning through others, and until you learn it yourself, until you experience it yourself, this is going in one ear, and maybe it stays there for a while, but eventually it just goes. So we're trying to create the karma that stays with us, so that, so in this relative nature that we are in, that we are purifying our understanding of this relative nature, and that the negativity, the confusion goes down for the sake of the understanding the omnipresence of all of this.